On New Year's Eve at a packed party, he was publicly rejected by his fiancée in front of everyone, until a homeless black girl appeared and made him see that moment was just the beginning of an unimaginable turning point. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. Ethan hurried out of the elevator, trying to keep his head held high, though the weight of recent humiliation stubbornly pulled it downward. As the doors opened into the hotel lobby, the usual hustle and bustle of Las Vegas came into view. Men in tailored suits, women in evening gowns, and the neon lights flashing outside. His stomach churned as the memory of what had happened just hours ago played on repeat. It was supposed to have been the grand day of his engagement, but it had devolved into a public spectacle of rejection, with Amber making it painfully clear she didn't care about the disappointment she was causing amidst the height of the celebration. Outside, the night was alive but bitterly cold. It was early winter, and a thin layer of snow was beginning to blanket the streets. The sharp contrast between the glowing signs and the biting wind was striking. Ethan walked a few steps along the sidewalk, the icy air stinging his face. His phone vibrated incessantly in his pocket. He knew it was either Mr. Sullivan, his boss, or perhaps Amber herself, with some new provocation. He ignored it, needing a few moments of peace before facing yet another confrontation. Farther down, near the corner of a 24-hour cafe, colorful holiday lights advertised year-end specials. People came and went, muffled laughter and the scent of fresh coffee wafting from a slightly ajar door. Inside, tourists huddled for warmth, caught up in dreams of big bets and late-night fun. That's when Ethan froze. The sight of her being practically shoved out the door caught his attention. The young woman, black, dressed in worn clothing, did her best to shield herself from the cold, though it wasn't much. The cafe's security guard glared at her with open disdain, barking that she was scaring off the customers. She wore sneakers ill-suited for the winter weather and a threadbare jacket that barely closed over her chest. She looked exhausted, clutching a plastic bag with a few belongings. Yet, despite it all, she straightened her posture and held her head high with quiet dignity. "I just needed a place to warm up," she murmured, her voice hesitant and frail. The guard didn't let her finish. With a subtle but firm shove, he pushed her onto the sidewalk. The scene twisted something in Ethan's chest. While so many reveled in the luxury and festivities of the season, here was someone being treated like a nuisance. He hesitated for a moment, the thought hammering in his mind. What if I just keep walking? I have my own problems. But a flicker of compassion overruled the thought. Ethan stepped forward, unsure what he was going to say. The guard, noticing his approach, sized him up. The expensive, albeit wrinkled suit and silk tie draped over his shoulders suggested this man was not an ordinary passerby. The people around them seemed oblivious to the commotion. After all, in Vegas, there's always so much happening that few pause for the details. "Is there a problem here?" Ethan asked, his voice calm but firm. "And who are you?" The guard shot back, hands on his hips. "This woman can't stay out here bothering the customers." The young woman lowered her head, clearly worn out. Perhaps she had faced such humiliation countless times before. Ethan took a deep breath, recalling his own recent shame in front of dozens of people. Though their situations were different, he understood the sting of exposure and mistreatment. "That's no way to talk to someone who's just trying to stay warm, especially on a night like this," Ethan replied. He turned to her. "Are you okay?" She blinked a few times, seemingly unsure whether to trust him. The idea that someone would come to her defense clearly surprised her. "You know how much coffee costs? Or should I call management?" The guard snapped, attempting to assert control. Ethan didn't hesitate. Impulsively, he pulled out his wallet. He was tired of seeing injustice. He handed the guard a few bills. "Here, cover whatever she eats or drinks. And if there's an issue, find me. The name's Ethan. If your management wants to talk, I'll be here." The guard, taken aback, realized the man before him wasn't some random do-gooder. The confidence in Ethan's tone and the casual way he handed over the money made the guard reconsider. After a moment of hesitation, he pocketed the cash. "Do what you want, but if she causes trouble, don't say I didn't warn you," the guard grumbled, walking back inside with a sour expression. For a moment, the young woman stood frozen, not sure how to react. She wasn't used to anyone standing up for her. Ethan felt a lump in his throat. He knew too well what it felt like to be judged and dismissed by people who didn't know the full story. The street felt even colder now, a light wind whistling through the air. He approached her gently. "You should go inside, even if it's just for something warm to drink." Still uncertain, she eventually nodded. They entered the cafe together, where the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee enveloped them. Several patrons glanced up as they walked in, some whispering among themselves, perhaps wondering why a well-dressed man was with someone clearly down on her luck. Ethan ignored them. Behind the counter, a server who had witnessed the earlier scene seemed moved to help. She quickly prepared a hot tea and a fresh cup of coffee. Without a word, she placed the drinks on a tray and slid it toward the young woman. "Here, sweetheart, this will warm you up," the server said kindly. The woman, visibly touched, held the steaming cup of tea with both hands, as though drawing every bit of warmth from it. Her eyes welled up with unshed tears, but she swallowed hard, unwilling to appear vulnerable. Ethan chose a table in a quiet corner, away from prying eyes. He sat down, and she hesitated for a moment before cautiously joining him, clutching the tea like a lifeline. Outside the window, the main strip of Vegas was a carnival of lights and activity. Cars sped by. Tourists reveled in the thrill of the season, each moment an opportunity to revel before the year's end. To Ethan, the city's glow had never felt so cold. "My name's Ethan. What's yours?" he asked softly. She took her time answering. "Ava," she finally said, her voice low. "Ava. All right. Look, I'm sorry if I overstepped, but I couldn't just stand by and watch what happened out there." Ava shook her head, leaning her elbows on the table as she exhaled a faint sigh. Whether it was of relief or exhaustion, Ethan couldn't tell. "Honestly, thank you," she murmured. "But people like me don't usually get help." Ethan bit his lower lip, her words cutting deeper than she probably realized. "I know. That's why I couldn't just walk away." The silence that followed was brief but heavy with unspoken truths. Ava sipped her tea in small gulps, letting the warmth spread through her. Ethan used the moment to gather his thoughts, still reeling from his own heartbreak. The memory of Amber's harsh words, the laughter of their guests on the rooftop, the shame of being left behind, all of it lingered like an open wound. And yet, sitting across from someone who bore scars of an entirely different nature made his own pain feel less consuming. Outside, the same guard from earlier passed by, casting a sidelong glance at the pair. Ava stiffened, gripping her cup tighter. It was clear she was always on edge, accustomed to being judged and dismissed. Minutes later, the server returned, clearing their empty cups and quietly offering more tea, free of charge. The cafe buzzed with activity, but Ethan and Ava seemed to exist in a bubble, insulated from the noise around them. Ava studied Ethan's face more closely. He looked tired, his eyes red-rimmed as if from sleepless nights or heavy worries. His clothes, though expensive, were disheveled, hinting at a rough day. She never would have guessed he was a millionaire. Nothing about him suggested ostentation in that moment. Ethan, meanwhile, felt the weight of his phone vibrating in his pocket. He knew that once this encounter ended, he'd have to face the flood of problems waiting for him. Yet here, in this small act of kindness, he'd found a strange sense of solace. Helping someone else, even in a small way, seemed to lighten the burden of his own struggles. "Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" he asked gently. Ava's face darkened, not with anger but with embarrassment. Admitting that she slept on the streets of Vegas wasn't easy. She simply shook her head, unwilling to elaborate. Ethan sighed deeply, his thoughts racing. He couldn't, in good conscience, let her return to the freezing streets, not with the snow thickening and the night growing colder. It was dangerous in so many ways, and he knew he wouldn't sleep peacefully if he walked away now. Taking a breath, he made up his mind. Turning slightly to face her, he spoke with quiet resolve, unconcerned about who might overhear. "Is there any way I can help you?" he asked. Ava, still clutching the cup, took a long moment to respond. Her expressive eyes, brimming with stories untold, locked onto his with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. The cold world outside clashed with the warmth kindling between them, and for a brief moment, she was speechless. "Is there any way I can help you?" Ethan asked, as Ava held her cup tightly, still unsure how to respond to such an unexpected gesture of kindness. Ava hesitated before responding to the kind invitation. Perhaps she wasn't sure if she could trust someone who, just minutes ago, had been a complete stranger. The empty cup trembled in her hands as she finally nodded, her brow furrowing with a faint expression of shame. The idea of accepting help from an elegant man in the middle of a cold Las Vegas night seemed surreal, but the freezing air was relentless, and staying outside could be dangerous. Once she agreed, Ethan got up and spoke briefly with the cafe attendant, who barely charged him for the tea and coffee they had consumed. He thanked the woman for her generosity and returned to where Ava sat, feeling an odd mix of relief and nervousness. He had just offered shelter to someone he didn't know, but there was something about her demeanor that stirred empathy and a strong sense of responsibility within him. They left the cafe, stepping into a gust of icy wind. Ava hunched her shoulders, pulling her face deeper into the tattered hood she wore. The bright lights of Las Vegas glittered around them, a glaring contrast to her current state of abandonment, making her shoulders feel heavier. Ethan walked silently beside her, scanning the streets for a hotel that wouldn't ask too many questions, where his credit card would suffice for a room that was at least decent. "Was it hard to get to this point?" he asked after a few minutes of walking through the dazzling avenue. "I mean, being without a place to stay." Ava hesitated before answering. She stepped absently into a puddle of melted water, the cold dampness seeping further into her already chilled feet. The sour stench of garbage from a nearby dumpster made her wrinkle her nose. "It didn't happen overnight," she said quietly. "I lost my job a few months ago. I thought I'd find another soon, but it didn't work out. Then, when I couldn't afford the room I shared with a friend anymore, I had to leave. She was struggling too, and that's it." "No family to help?" Ethan asked cautiously. Ava shook her head. "I'm not in contact with them. It's never been easy." She sighed, the memory bringing not just sadness but a flicker of long-buried anger. They walked further, dodging groups of tourists who shouted in excitement. It was the quintessential Las Vegas scene, people laughing, carrying shopping bags, attractions everywhere. The cold seemed not to touch them, so absorbed were they in the city's allure. Ahead, a small hotel sign blinked, some of its neon lights flickering. "Let's try that one," Ethan suggested, pointing to the place. As they approached, he gathered the courage to share a bit about his own evening. He didn't delve into details but let slip. "I was publicly rejected tonight, at a huge party, full of important people." Ava looked up at him, surprised. "That must have been awful." "It was. A lot worse than I thought it could be." He fell silent, as though recalling the scene was painful enough. Ava, despite barely knowing Ethan, felt curious, but also understood that prying would only deepen the wounds. This night was already challenging enough for both of them. They stopped in front of the modest hotel, where a sign advertised affordable rates. The exterior, however, had a shabby air, peeling paint on the walls and a fluorescent light in the reception area that flickered intermittently. Still, it was better than nothing. They entered, brushing snow off Ethan's coat and Ava's hood as it stubbornly clung to them. The lobby was small. A soda machine stood in one corner, and the chairs beside it looked as old as the threadbare carpeted decor. At the counter, a middle-aged receptionist was engrossed in his phone. He looked up when he noticed them, his expression darkening instantly at the sight of Ava. "How can I help you?" he asked sharply, addressing Ethan directly. "How many nights?" Ethan pulled out his wallet. "Maybe just one to start. I'll pay in advance." The receptionist glanced skeptically at Ava, who lingered slightly behind as if trying to make herself as unnoticeable as possible. He frowned and asked with a hint of suspicion, "For both of you, or—" "A room for her. I'll find somewhere else," Ethan replied firmly. "She just needs a place to sleep tonight." The man scratched his unshaven chin. "Right. Any luggage?" he asked, emphasizing the word. Ava shrugged, holding up a nearly empty plastic bag. The receptionist seemed to bite back a comment but couldn't hide the disdain in his tone. "Careful, son. Not everyone's good company, you know." It felt like a dagger. Ava lowered her eyes, accustomed to hearing such remarks but still stung every time as though it were the first. Ethan narrowed his eyes, his jaw tightening slightly. "There's no need for that kind of comment," he said, opening his wallet. "We just want to rent a room." The receptionist shrugged, raising his eyebrows mockingly. He took the credit card Ethan handed over, then processed it with deliberate slowness, as if to assert his authority. After a drawn-out pause, he said, "All set. Second floor, room 14. Ethan turned to Ava, motioning for her to follow. He noticed that a couple seated in the lobby had paused their conversation to stare at them, their expressions a mix of curiosity and judgment. The discomfort in the air was tangible. They climbed a narrow staircase. The walls were painted yellow, lit by dim bulbs, with a red-stained carpet underfoot. The faint scent of cheap cleaning products mingled with a trace of cigarette smoke. Each door bore a worn metallic number. Ava grew increasingly self-conscious, though grateful. She glanced at Ethan, wanting to express something but unsure how to phrase it. When they reached the room, she finally found her voice. "Why are you doing this for me? You don't even know me." Ethan took a deep breath, pushing the door open. There was a shyness in his eyes, as if he hesitated to reveal too much. "I was humiliated tonight. It's not the same as being homeless, but I know a little about feeling alone when you need someone the most. I couldn't just leave you there." He stepped inside first and turned on the light. The room was simple, an old double bed, a worn nightstand with a faded lamp and a small heater by the window. Not cozy, but it was warm and had a roof. For Ava, it was a luxury compared to the relentless cold of the streets. She stepped in slowly, taking in the faded bedspread and the linens that seemed clean but well-worn. Standing in the center of the room, she felt the firm floor beneath her feet and couldn't contain the emotion. It was the first time in weeks that she had a space of her own, however temporary. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes glistening. "I don't know how I can repay you, but I'm really grateful." Ethan shook his head and moved to the window, looking out. Below, another bright avenue stretched endlessly, lined with casinos, flashing signs, and ceaseless motion. Turning back to Ava, he tried to smile. "No need to thank me. Let's figure things out tomorrow, okay? For now, just rest." Ava nodded, clutching her plastic bag tightly to her chest. She hadn't imagined her day ending this way, being helped by a man who, despite his polished appearance, was also carrying his own burdens. She let out a long sigh of relief, closing her eyes for a moment. "Can I call you if I—" "Yes, of course. I'll be nearby. I'm not going anywhere," Ethan assured her, though he wasn't entirely sure where he'd spend the night himself. He had a vague plan to return to his hotel room, but truthfully, he didn't want to be alone, dwelling on his disappointment. Still, this wasn't the time to burden Ava with his problems. Finally, he opened the door to leave. The narrow hallway felt even quieter now, as though the world had gone to sleep. The dim lighting gave it a slightly eerie vibe, and Ethan's expression turned a bit solemn. "I have a few things to take care of, but I'll come back tomorrow morning to check on you, okay?" Ava gripped the doorknob and nodded. She felt as vulnerable as she did relieved. She wasn't sure if she'd be able to sleep, but at least she was warm and sheltered. "Okay. Thank you. Truly." Ethan inclined his head in a small nod and stepped into the hallway. Before leaving, he gave her one last look, as though ensuring it was safe to leave her alone. "If you need anything, just let me know. I won't abandon you here," he said, and Ava, startled, realized she might have found someone who genuinely cared. The next morning, Ethan woke up already feeling the weight of what awaited him at the office. He had spent the night nearly sleepless in a makeshift corner of the hotel room he could still afford. His phone displayed a barrage of messages from Mr. Sullivan, urgently summoning him to a meeting. Looking in the mirror, the dark circles under his eyes betrayed him. The humiliation of the previous night and the responsibilities looming over him gave him no respite. He swallowed the bitter feeling, adjusted the most presentable suit he could find, and headed out. On his way, the cold Vegas wind cut across his face. The shy sun seemed unable to warm the city at that hour. Among the cars and tourists oblivious to his rush, Ethan felt an increasing restlessness. His thoughts wandered to Ava, wondering if she had managed to rest or if she was still preoccupied with finding any kind of work. He had promised to check on her, but his boss's relentless messages had changed his plans. He had to go straight to the company and face whatever lay ahead. Upon arriving at the imposing building where he worked, Ethan noticed the strange looks from some of his colleagues. Rumors must have spread. As he crossed the glass door, a secretary tried to stop him, but he brushed past her, heading straight for Mr. Sullivan's office. The hallway seemed longer than usual, each step echoing in his mind. "How am I going to handle all of this now?" "Mr. Sullivan is waiting for you," the secretary informed him, returning to her desk with a look of pity. Ethan entered without knocking. His boss, seated behind an immaculate desk, put down the documents he was reading and raised his gaze, his eyes widening slightly upon seeing Ethan. The silence in those first few seconds was suffocating. Then, Mr. Sullivan cleared his throat, straightening his tie. "Sit down," he ordered in a dry tone. Ethan obeyed, feeling like a schoolboy caught in trouble. The office was as pristine as ever, with large windows letting in the daylight. Yet, no amount of light could warm the atmosphere of that room. "I've been reading some unpleasant news," Mr. Sullivan began, gesturing toward a few tabloid clippings on his desk. "You and Amber broke up in a rather scandalous way, shall we say. This is not the kind of publicity I need right now." The mere mention of Amber made Ethan shudder, recalling her cold gaze when she rejected him. It was the last thing he wanted to discuss, but now it was inevitable. "I know," he replied, trying to sound calm. "It was a disaster, but I'm trying to fix it." "Fix it?" Sullivan raised an eyebrow. "There are rumors going around that you've been, how shall I put this, keeping new company. They mention a homeless woman or something along those lines. Is this true?" Ethan remained silent for a moment. He thought of Ava, her tired face, the way she struggled to maintain her dignity despite everything. He also remembered how people at the cafe and hotel had looked at her. It infuriated him, but he couldn't lose his temper, not in front of his boss. "I see no problem in helping someone in need," he replied, keeping his voice steady. "No problem?" Sullivan tossed a local newspaper onto the desk. On the cover was a small photo of Ethan with Ava, likely taken by a bystander outside the casino. "Do you think this doesn't affect your image? And, consequently, the company's?" Ethan clenched his jaw, feeling cornered. Yet a restrained anger grew inside him, realizing the level of prejudice. He wanted to protest, to say he didn't care about the tabloid's opinions, but the threat of losing his important position, his livelihood, and all that came with it, made him hesitate. "Look," Sullivan leaned forward, "you need to understand we're closing critical year-end contracts. Any scandal could cost us millions. So spare me your emotional justifications. I don't want problems." "Fine." Ethan swallowed hard. "I'll be careful. But I won't stop helping if I see someone in need." Sullivan gave a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. "That's admirable, but keep it out of the spotlight, and especially out of my investors' reach. Understood?" Ethan nodded, but inside he felt increasingly torn. He stood up, trying to end the conversation. The pressure was suffocating. Before he could leave, Sullivan delivered a final warning. "If you don't repair your image by the end of the year, consider yourself fired. Are we clear?" The lump in Ethan's throat only grew, a direct, blunt threat. He nodded and left the room, praying this was just a passing scare. That same day, Ava had left the hotel early. She counted the few coins left in her pocket, hoping to buy something simple for breakfast, but decided against it when she realized she needed to save the little she had. She opted for drinking water from the sink in the lobby restroom and pressed on. Her goal was clear: to find a job. Any job. She walked through side streets in Vegas, trying not to lose hope despite the string of rejections she had faced in so many places. Still, with every door she passed, every office, every diner, she hoped someone would give her at least 5 minutes of attention. She started at a small corner cafe. There, the owner didn't even let her step inside, claiming he had already hired all the staff needed for the holiday season. She moved on to a larger restaurant with a "Help Wanted" sign on the door. It seemed promising. She approached the counter and asked to speak with the manager. A staff member eyed her worn clothing suspiciously, but led her to the back, where the manager was. He scrutinized her from head to toe, lingering on her frayed jeans and sneakers with soles nearly peeling off. When she inquired about the job, the man cleared his throat and asked an offensive question, whether she had a place to live or used drugs. Ava maintained her composure despite the indignation. She tried to explain that securing a job would help her stabilize, but her words stumbled. The manager, unwilling to listen, gave her a standard response about keeping her number on file, though she didn't even have a phone. She left with a heavy heart. No matter how hard she tried, she felt judged for her appearance at every place she entered. Her pride, though still intact, took another hit. She needed to breathe deeply, holding back tears. She found a bench in a park to sit and collect herself. Her clothes didn't protect her from the wind, but she needed a moment to calm down. She thought of Ethan. Would he come looking for her? He had said he wouldn't abandon her, but at the same time, she didn't want to be a burden. As much as she liked the idea of having a friendly face amidst such hardship, she knew his life was entirely different. Moreover, those around him clearly disapproved of their association, something evident at the hotel the night before. Shivering from the cold, Ava decided to get up and keep searching. She couldn't afford to stand still. She headed to a more remote neighborhood, asking at small local shops if they needed help, even temporarily. The reception wasn't much better, but at least she found a few people who suggested places where she might have some luck. By late afternoon, after countless closed doors, Ava approached a massive casino, one of those that glowed intensely under the evening light. She didn't intend to gamble. She didn't have a penny to spare. But rumors said large casinos hired extra staff for the holiday season, perhaps for general tasks, cleaning, or other minor services. She thought she might try at the reception just to ask about vacancies. However, before she could reach the entrance, 2 security guards appeared out of nowhere, blocking her path. Their stares were immediate, and one even placed a hand on her shoulder, ordering her to leave. They insisted it wasn't allowed to loiter around the premises without an invitation. She tried to explain she was there to inquire about a job, but they didn't listen. They pushed her onto the sidewalk, and a small crowd of onlookers began to gather. Ava felt a lump in her throat and wanted to protest. She was tired of being treated like trash. She took a deep breath, ready to shout something that might worsen the situation, when she heard a familiar voice calling her name. "Ava! Hey, let her go!" It was Ethan, hurrying out of a taxi that had just arrived. Moments earlier, someone from his company had called, informing him that that woman was being removed near the casino and warning that the situation could escalate into a bigger issue if it made the press. Despite his own fears, he didn't hesitate to come. Ava was confused, unsure how he had appeared so quickly, but his presence gave her a strange sense of relief. The guards turned to face Ethan. Recognizing the man in a suit who still bore the air of an executive, they hesitated. "Is there a problem?" Ethan asked, staring down the two large guards. "She can't just loiter around the entrance. She's a beggar and will disturb the guests," one of them justified. "She's here to ask about a job. She's not a criminal. Can you give us a moment?" It was a tense moment. One of the guards huffed, glancing at the other, who merely shrugged. They eventually stepped back, and the small crowd of spectators dispersed, disappointed by the lack of a more dramatic ending. Ava approached Ethan, her eyes brimming with tears, whether from humiliation or gratitude she couldn't tell. "Are you okay?" he asked, lightly resting a hand on her shoulder. She nodded, breathing unevenly. "I'm fine, but it's always like this. Sorry for dragging you into this." Ethan shook his head, glaring at the lingering onlookers. "Don't apologize for something that's not your fault." Ava bit her lip, staring at the ground. He looked exhausted, likely dealing with his own issues at work, yet he was here by her side. His presence was a comfort in a world that seemed increasingly cruel. The flash of a camera caught Ethan's attention. Across the street, someone pointed a phone in their direction. In Vegas, avoiding gawkers was impossible. More pictures and gossip would undoubtedly surface, jeopardizing his position at the company. Yet, looking at Ava, Ethan realized he couldn't just turn his back to save his reputation. He took a deep breath, adjusting his already rumpled suit. Then, he lightly placed his arm around Ava's back, as if shielding her from prying eyes. The cold wind carried the city's sounds, horns, scattered voices, and the distant jingle of slot machines. "I'm not running away. If you're willing, Ava, let's face this together," Ethan said, meeting the flashing cameras and curious stares head-on. The curious crowd began to disperse, but some still kept their phones pointed, capturing the moment as Ethan stood by Ava's side, shielding her like a barrier against the wave of judgmental eyes. She, visibly shaken by everything that had happened, turned to him again, trying to process his words. That, "We'll face this together," felt so far removed from her reality. Who, after all, would stand up against so many people for someone they barely knew? "All right," she whispered, her voice hesitant but grateful. Ethan guided her away from the casino entrance. He could feel the stares burning into his back but kept his composure. They walked several blocks to escape the focus of the onlookers' cameras and eventually stopped at a small corner cafe. Its modest facade promised a calmer atmosphere, exactly what they needed. They chose a table near the window. Outside, the bright lights of Las Vegas continued to flash, but inside, the air was more peaceful. A waitress approached and handed them menus, her expression uninterested. Ava lowered her gaze, avoiding the awkwardness she often felt. Once the waitress walked away, Ethan broke the silence. "See how they react? All it takes is someone questioning if we're acceptable to turn us into a spectacle." Ava nodded, staring at her hands. She was still trying to stay composed, despite her exhaustion. Strangely, for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt like someone was truly listening. "I'm sorry if I caused problems. I know this could hurt your image," she said, looking at him, the word image feeling cold but appropriate. Ethan sighed. "I won't lie. It's going to complicate things. Mr. Sullivan is already on my back because of the Amber scandal, and now this." "Amber?" Ava asked, recognizing the name from earlier. Ethan hesitated for a moment. He didn't want to unload his personal baggage on her, but a brief explanation seemed unavoidable. "She was my fiancée, or almost. She dumped me in a very public, humiliating way. Everything's been upside down since." Ava frowned, reflecting on how everyone seemed to have their own nightmares. She'd never imagined that a man in an expensive suit, seemingly so put together, could be so broken inside. They remained silent until the waitress brought a double espresso for Ethan and a hot chocolate for Ava, a gesture from him. The first sip warmed her body, a small comfort that momentarily lifted the weight of the day. Meanwhile, Ethan checked his phone, finding gossip site notifications linking him to Ethan, the troubled heir, along with headlines about a mysterious woman. His stomach churned. By tomorrow, he'd likely face more accusations from Mr. Sullivan, who despised negative publicity. "I could disappear," Ava murmured, clutching her cup. "If it's better for you, I don't want to ruin your career." Ethan shook his head, his eyes fixed on hers. "You're not going anywhere. We'll figure this out. I have a friend who might help us find a place." The next day, the aroma of instant coffee lingered in a small conference room at Ethan's company. He had just endured a tense meeting with Mr. Sullivan, who had berated him for the latest scandal. To his relief, Neil, a cheerful colleague, pulled him aside. But that morning, Neil wore a serious expression. "Man, I've heard some rumors," Neil said bluntly. "People are saying Amber's plotting something, keeping tabs on everything you're doing, especially with that girl in the photos." Ethan let out a long sigh. "That doesn't surprise me. Amber always needs control, and she gets furious when she loses it." "Yeah, well, Sullivan's pressuring everyone too. He even pulled me in to ask about your personal life. He's determined to salvage the company's image." "Damn." Ethan rubbed his face, feeling the tension building. "What did you tell him?" "Not much. I said I didn't know anything or anyone involved. But man, watch your back. Amber and Sullivan are out for blood." Ethan leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. Neil leaned closer, lowering his voice. "If you need a place for someone to stay, I know a guy who rents out small studios in Vegas. Cheap but decent. Interested?" Ethan looked up, surprised by the suggestion. "Yeah, definitely. Can you give me his contact info?" The rest of the day dragged on, filled with cold meetings and whispers spreading through the office. Ethan couldn't wait to leave and meet Ava. He knew she was anxious, waiting for a solution to her housing dilemma. If he could secure a small studio, it might be the first step toward giving her some independence without drawing Sullivan or Amber's attention. That evening, after texting Ava to meet him at a bus stop, Ethan called the studio owner. The man sounded accommodating and confirmed he had a vacancy. Ethan immediately asked him to hold it, promising to pay a few days in advance. Ava arrived on time, her eyes tired but showing a glimmer of hope. Ethan led her to a modest building in a quieter part of Vegas, where the casino lights didn't shine as brightly. The owner greeted them at the door, looking eager for business. "It's simple but clean," the man said, opening the door to the studio. "Let me know if you want to stay longer than a week." Ava stepped inside cautiously. The room was small, with a decent mattress, a makeshift kitchen, and a window overlooking a dimly lit street. It wasn't luxurious, but it felt like paradise compared to sleeping on the streets. "This works for me," she said softly, a restrained smile on her face. "It's more than enough." Ethan pulled out his wallet to settle the payment with the owner, who quickly left, leaving the two alone in the modest space. The warm yellow light highlighted the bare walls, but to Ava, it symbolized dignity and freedom. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, sitting carefully on the edge of the mattress. "I still can't believe this is real." "Thank me by being okay." Ethan pocketed the receipt. "It's only temporary, but it's a start." She nodded, her eyes glistening. He could see she was holding back tears of relief, perhaps, from finally having a place to call her own. That's when a voice, unmistakable to Ethan, echoed in the hallway. "Anybody here?" The door was open. Amber. She entered, wearing a designer jacket and sparkling heels, a stark contrast to the humble setting. Her eyes flared with rage as she took in the sight of Ethan and Ava. "So this is where you're hiding?" Amber sneered, raising an eyebrow. "My God, Ethan, how low can you go?" Ava stood, unsure of what to say. Amber approached, dripping with disdain. "This is her, isn't it?" She looked Ava up and down. The media didn't exaggerate after all. I can see why they're calling this a scandal." Ethan exhaled deeply, trying to stay calm. "Amber, leave. This has nothing to do with you." Amber laughed bitterly. "Oh, please. The Playboy and the homeless girl. A heartwarming charity case. But let me remind you, Ethan, Sullivan is livid. And if you think playing the hero will save you, think again. You have contracts to honor, and this nonsense only makes things worse." Ava's face burned with embarrassment, but she bit her tongue, knowing that reacting would only worsen the situation for Ethan. He, however, stepped forward, his voice steady. "It's over, Amber. Enough. I won't back down just to feed your need for control." She scoffed, flipping her hair with a sharp gesture. "You really think you can beat me? Sullivan will have you out on the street in no time, and we'll see who's begging then." The tension in the room was suffocating. Ava finally lifted her head and met Amber's gaze, speaking in a quiet but firm voice. "Say whatever you want, but I'm not running anymore. Those days are over." Amber chuckled mockingly but was clearly frustrated by Ava's resilience. She turned on her heel and stormed out, leaving behind a trail of expensive perfume and arrogance. Before the door slammed shut, she threw out one last threat. "We'll see who has the last laugh." The silence that followed was deafening. Ava, still tense, tried to steady herself. Ethan walked to the window and inhaled deeply, the serene street outside a stark contrast to the emotional storm they had just endured. "I'm sorry," he said, turning back to Ava, who stood frozen near the mattress. "I never wanted you to go through this." "It's not your fault," she replied, running a hand over her face. "Thank you for not leaving me alone." He stepped closer, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I promise I won't give up, no matter what Amber or Sullivan try." Their eyes met, filled with mutual understanding. Despite their fears, they felt a small sense of relief in knowing they weren't facing this alone. Then Ethan's phone rang, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet studio. He answered and listened for a moment before hanging up, his expression grim. "Mr. Sullivan wants to see me, now, and it doesn't sound good." Ethan left the studio where he had dropped off Ava and headed to Mr. Sullivan's office, feeling as if he were carrying a heavy weight on his chest. The phone call had been curt and direct. "Come now." He knew that nothing good would come from this sudden meeting, but he couldn't avoid it. He had to face the consequences of the recent exposure, the headlines placing him at the center of a scandal. Upon arriving at the building, he noticed the hallways seemed emptier than usual. Perhaps it was the tension in the air or just the late hour. However, he soon found Neil, his friend and co-worker, standing in front of Sullivan's office, waiting with a worried expression. "Good luck in there," Neil murmured, almost as a warning. Ethan nodded, taking a deep breath before pushing the door open. As he entered, the room was steeped in semi-darkness, illuminated only by an elegant lamp on Sullivan's desk, casting light on a pile of documents and a tablet. Sullivan raised his eyes, narrowing them as if scrutinizing Ethan's every reaction. Then he gestured for him to come closer. "It's high time we had a serious talk," Sullivan said, his deep voice echoing in the spacious room. "Are you aware that the headlines are practically screaming that the finance darling has turned into a scandal magnet?" Ethan closed the door behind him and took a few steps forward, keeping a cautious distance. "I'm aware, and I also know there's a lot of exaggeration in it." Sullivan exhaled deeply, resting his hands on the desk. "Exaggeration? An ex-fiancé publicly humiliating you is one thing, but parading around with a—" He hesitated, searching for the right word. "Homeless woman and letting the media capture compromising photos. That's not exaggeration, that's fact." Ethan felt his face flush. He wanted to fire back but restrained himself to avoid losing control. "I only helped her because she needed it, and I still think it was the right thing to do." "The right thing?" Sullivan rolled his eyes. "Our contract with the French investors is hanging by a thread. Ever heard of corporate image? If you don't fix this situation and stay out of trouble, you'll find it very hard to continue here." Though Ethan had expected something like this, hearing it so bluntly still stung. "So you're telling me to abandon Ava just because she doesn't fit the image you want?" The boss suddenly stood up, his chair sliding back with a faint noise. "I want you to decide what's more important to you, the company that pays your bills or a stranger who's tarnishing your reputation. Trust me, I've seen great careers sink for less." Ethan struggled to breathe steadily. 1,000 questions swirled in his mind. Why did success have to mean ignoring someone in need? Why did everything have to be so calculated? He clenched his fists at his sides but held back. He knew that if he exploded, Sullivan would use it against him. "I'll think about it," he said at last, curtly, "but I can't promise I'll choose what you think is appropriate." Sullivan let out a sarcastic laugh. "Well, then we have a problem. I'm giving you a deadline, Ethan. Fix everything by New Year's. Rekindle things with Amber, or at least pretend you're on good terms and make sure this girl disappears from the narrative, or you can pack your bags." The mention of Amber made Ethan's head throb. He felt like he was trapped in a web of blackmail. "I understand," he replied, his voice tight. Sullivan sat back down, picking up his tablet and typing something briskly. "Consider this your official warning. You have a few days to clean up this mess. Fail, and you're out." Ethan left without saying goodbye, closing the door gently, though he wanted to slam it. His heart pounded, and his stomach churned. Walking through the corridor, he found Neil waiting by the elevators. "How did it go?" Neil asked anxiously. "Exactly as I feared. He gave me an ultimatum." Neil exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "I'm sorry, man. Truly." "And Ava? What about her?" "They want her gone," Ethan said, his anger evident. "Like she's disposable." Neil nodded, unsure what to say. When the elevator arrived, they exchanged a brief nod. Ethan stepped inside, staring at the metallic doors closing, feeling an odd sense of claustrophobia in the confined space. Back at Ava's studio, the night had grown long and silent. After Amber's furious visit, Ava had tried to distract herself by staring out the window at the nearly deserted street. But the tension made it impossible to relax. The distant hum of cars and footsteps echoed through the neighborhood, and every passing headlight cast twisted shadows on the wall. She felt guilty, as though she were the cause of the storm in Ethan's life. Part of her believed he had every right to step away and protect his future. Surely the people in his circle expected nothing less. And after all, who was she to claim any place in his life? By morning, Ava woke early, her back aching from a restless, anxious sleep. She needed to look for work, but the turmoil of recent days left her feeling more insecure. Even so, she mustered the courage to leave, determined to revisit some stores and cafes. It was the only way to earn money and perhaps begin paying her own way. Her first attempt was at a fast food chain. The manager seemed moved by her story but grew hesitant when he noticed how nervous she appeared. He promised to call, but Ava knew it was a polite rejection. Later, she tried her luck at a small neighborhood market. The middle-aged owner listened politely but didn't need to say much. Her eyes conveyed the truth. Too many people. Too few jobs. Ava left without hope. With each closed door, her chest filled with frustration she could barely contain. Exhausted and hungry, she found refuge in a park where the trees, bare from the cold, stretched their dry branches against the gray Las Vegas sky. She sat on a bench adjusting her worn jacket, feeling a sharp pang of despair. Time seemed to be running out. If she couldn't find a way to support herself, Ethan's help wouldn't be enough to keep her off the streets, and she didn't want to depend on him forever. By late afternoon, Ethan parked Neil's borrowed car outside the studio. He needed to tell Ava what had happened with Sullivan, though he dreaded her reaction. He knocked softly and waited. Ava opened the door, looking exhausted. "How was your day?" she asked without preamble. Ethan stepped inside, observing the simple, almost empty space. He noticed her defeated expression, though she tried to hide it. For a moment, he wanted to embrace her, to tell her everything would be okay. Instead, he focused on reality. Sullivan gave me an ultimatum. If I don't restore my image by New Year's, I'm out of the company. And he made it clear that you're part of the problem in his eyes. Ava stayed silent, staring at him with a mix of pity and gratitude. She knew Ethan had no obligation to help her stay there. "So that's it," she said hoarsely. "I'm a liability?" "No." Ethan shook his head immediately, shoving his hands into his pockets. "You're not a liability. They think that if I cut ties with you, everything will be fixed." She lowered her gaze to the floor, pressing her lips together as if mustering the courage to voice a thought she'd already had. "Maybe I should disappear for good. I don't want to ruin your life." Ethan stepped closer but hesitated to touch her. "It's not about ruining my life. If I give in to this pressure, what's left of me? Living a lie, pretending I don't care?" "But what about your job, your contracts?" Ava asked, thinking of the insecurity this would bring. "I don't know. I'm at my limit." The tension on his face was palpable. "But I won't abandon you just to appease a bunch of bigots." For a moment, silence filled the room. She raised her eyes, tucking her hair behind her ears to keep her emotions in check. She desperately wanted to believe Ethan could find a way to manage everything, but she could see the enormity of the situation in his eyes. "I tried to find work, too," she said, swallowing hard, frustrated. "But no one gave me a chance. Again. It feels like people judge me before I even speak." Ethan opened his mouth to reply, but his phone vibrated. He pulled it out and saw Amber's name flashing on the screen. He didn't answer, just let the call end. On impulse, he turned off the phone entirely, unwilling to hear her voice at that moment. "They won't stop," he muttered, meeting Ava's gaze. "Amber will try to destroy you however she can. Sullivan, too. It's going to be very hard. I'm willing to face whatever comes, as long as you don't get hurt because of me," Ava said, insecure but trying to sound resolute. Ethan looked at her with both tenderness and sorrow. He thought about how alone she had been in the world, and how she now placed her trust in him, despite having little assurance. He took a few steps toward the small window, which revealed the city as night fell. A nearby bar's neon sign blinked green, casting a faint glow into the room. "We have little time, but I still think I can figure something out," he said, almost to himself. "I just don't know what." Ava approached, her voice trembling slightly. "What if I just leave? I could move to another city, maybe even another state." "No." Ethan spun around suddenly, looking at her with determination. "You're not running away. Not anymore." His words anchored Ava, tying her to that place, to that fragile sense of hope and courage. They exchanged a deep look, unable to put into words the weight of everything. Late into the night, after exhausting themselves discussing the few options they had, Ethan said goodbye, needing to return to the hotel where he still kept a room. He promised to try speaking with Sullivan again, or perhaps someone higher up, if possible. He left Ava with a heavy heart, though he tried not to show it. When Ethan reached his hotel room, he barely had the energy to remove his shoes. He collapsed into the chair by the window, where a dim lamp lit only a corner of the room. With tired eyes, he turned his phone back on, and immediately saw several notifications. Among them was a message from Sullivan, marked as urgent. He opened it and read, "I hope you know what you're doing. The company won't tolerate another misstep. Amber assured me we can resolve everything if you cooperate. Think it over. If you don't come to an agreement, I'll make decisions on my own." Ethan stood, a chill running down his spine. "They're trying to blackmail me from all sides," he muttered, staring at the screen's glow in the dark room. Suddenly, he realized he was utterly drained. Without thinking further, he turned off the phone. He needed a few moments of total silence to organize his thoughts. The threat had been made clear. Either he yielded or he lost everything. He dragged himself to the bed but decided he couldn't sleep with the harsh light on. He turned off the only lamp and lay there, staring into the darkness, where only the faint outline of his phone glimmered. Sullivan's message was burned into his memory, and the relentless ticking of time haunted him. Finally, without another word, Ethan fell onto the mattress, his heart pounding relentlessly. Ethan turns off the light, staring at the phone where Sullivan's message lingers. He knows the deadline is approaching, and the choice he makes will change everything. Ethan woke up the next morning after a restless night filled with confusing dreams. He had fallen asleep still in his suit, shoes discarded on the floor, his mind exhausted by Sullivan's threats and the increasingly delicate situation with Ava. His first thought as he opened his eyes was that he needed to talk to Amber. It was a realization that filled him with a mixture of disgust and resignation, but he knew that if he wanted to keep his position in the company, he had to seriously consider the unspoken proposals Sullivan had hinted at, reconciling with Amber, restoring his image, and leaving Ava behind. As he combed his hair in the bathroom mirror, the reflection staring back at him seemed unfamiliar. He noticed the dark circles under his eyes, the weariness etched into his face, the vacant look in his gaze. He felt trapped between his conscience and the need to salvage what remained of his career. He knew Amber was unreliable, yet she could shield him from Sullivan. The contradiction gnawed at him. Ethan decided not to delay. He called Amber early in the morning, his voice still rough from sleep. She answered with a tone of surprise, laced with a sarcastic cheerfulness. "Glad you called, Ethan," she began, her triumph poorly concealed. "Finally realized you can't ignore me if you want to stay on top?" He took a deep breath, trying to contain his irritation. "It's not that simple, Amber, but I'd like to meet with you somewhere private. Can we arrange that?" She seemed to relish his words. "Of course. Meet me at the suite I'm staying in at the Palms Hotel. I'm free this afternoon." Ethan agreed, ending the call with a bitter taste in his mouth. He looked out of the hotel room window where he was staying. Below, the city was bustling with life. Thousands of people were going about their day, oblivious to the drama he was living. And amidst all of it, there was Ava, who trusted him with an almost naive faith. At noon, he mustered the courage to text Ava, asking if they could meet. She replied hesitantly, saying she'd be out job hunting again but would return to the studio in the late afternoon. They agreed to meet there. Ava spent her day knocking on doors once more, facing the same excuses, the same judgmental looks. No one wanted to take the risk of hiring her, especially during the busy holiday season in Vegas, when temporary jobs were given to trusted candidates, and she was far from projecting that image. She felt invisible, yet simultaneously branded with a stigma that left her struggling to breathe. After hours of frustration, she stepped into a bookstore with a small cafe attached. She noticed a poster on the counter about a social empowerment project. It described short courses in hospitality and culinary skills, with partnerships for job placements. Though she didn't have high hopes, Ava felt her heart race. It could be her lifeline. The woman in charge, a kindly lady with a warm smile, explained that the project was located in another part of town but was worth pursuing. With her eyes shining with cautious hope, Ava took the flyer and slipped it into her pocket. It was a small light at the end of a very dark tunnel. Meanwhile, Ethan drove to the luxurious Palms Hotel, where Amber awaited him in style. A valet opened his car door, and he took the panoramic elevator up, his reflection on the glass showing a man lost in thought. In the hallway, he caught the overpowering scent of Amber's perfume wafting from her suite. He rang the doorbell and waited. Amber opened the door wearing a tight dress, high heels, and a smile full of ulterior motives. She gestured for him to enter the spacious, gold and white decorated room, an extravagant display of wealth. The panoramic window offered a stunning view of the city, but Ethan wasn't impressed. He remained standing, making it clear he didn't plan to stay long. "Still tense, I see," Amber remarked, settling onto a velvet sofa. "Want something to drink?" "No," I just want to understand what you really want from me, Ethan said, meeting her gaze. Amber smirked. Playing coy? I want you to undo the mess you made by leaving me in front of everyone. I want you to help rebuild the perfect couple image we had. Do that, and I can convince Sullivan to back you again. And Ava? Ethan asked bluntly, testing her reaction. She's a problem. You know that. Just cut ties with her, and no one will care anymore. Amber shrugged. And to be perfectly clear, here's the deal. You choose. Stay with her, and you lose your status. Come back to me, and you keep your job, your contracts, everything. Ethan's stomach tightened. Amber's ruthless tone left no doubt she wasn't joking. He moved closer to the window, gazing at the city below. He needed a compromise, or at least time to think. Resisting Sullivan would only lead to him being ousted from the company. He began, his voice faltering. I'll think about it. But don't expect me to decide right now. Amber seemed pleased to see him wavering. Good. Think it over, but don't take too long. New Year's is just around the corner. Sullivan's deadline, isn't it? He nodded silently and left, feeling a lump in his throat. Sitting in his car afterward, he gripped the steering wheel, unsure whether to start the engine or simply give up entirely. Amber's words echoed in his mind. He was on the brink of doing what he swore he never would, surrender to the pressure, the prejudice. Yet the thought of losing everything he had built was overwhelming. Late in the afternoon, Ava returned to her small studio, her face reflecting cautious optimism. She carried the flyer for the social project, determined to discuss it with Ethan and show him she could find a solution to rely less on him. She was surprised when the door opened shortly after she entered. Ethan stood there, his expression distant. "You're early," she remarked, trying to sound casual, but she immediately noticed his somber demeanor. "Is everything okay?" Ethan stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "We need to talk," he said, rubbing his face in exhaustion. "It's about Sullivan and Amber. I don't think I can keep fighting them." Ava froze, still holding the flyer between her fingers. Her heart raced. "What do you mean?" He sighed deeply, staring at the floor. "I didn't want to, but they want me to reconcile with Amber, fix this whole image mess. If I don't, I'll lose my job, my contracts, everything. You know how Sullivan operates. He won't let it go." Ava blinked a few times, stunned. Though she had anticipated this, hearing Ethan admit he was seriously considering giving in to the blackmail hurt. "So you're going to choose Amber? Pretend everything is fine?" "I don't know if it's pretending," he murmured, confused. "I just know it's the only way to keep everything I've worked for. I can't risk losing it all, Ava. I don't have the strength to keep fighting." Ava lowered her gaze, feeling her trust in him dissolve. A pang of disappointment overtook her. She wasn't sure if she should argue, try to convince him, or simply accept his decision. Deep inside, she felt it was unfair. "I understand. You have a lot to lose." Ethan, uncomfortable with her silence, tried to explain further. "I don't think it's right what they're doing, but—" He paused, looking at her. Reality is harsh. She swallowed hard, reflecting on how she too faced harsh realities daily, with nowhere to turn. Yet she didn't want to force Ethan into the same vulnerability. As much as it hurt, she felt it would be cruel to ask him to sacrifice his entire life for someone he barely knew, someone who had appeared out of nowhere, bringing more trouble. So, she decided to speak firmly. "I signed up for a social project. If I get in, they'll help me with courses and maybe a steady job. That way, I can move on with my life." Ethan raised his eyebrows, visibly surprised. "Ava, you don't have to rush. I can help pay for the course, support you for a while until—" "No," she interrupted him, her voice controlled. "I can't be caught in this war between you, Amber, and Sullivan. You have enough problems already." He tried to protest, but the sadness on her face stopped him. Ava seemed resolute, and he knew she wouldn't change her mind. "I don't want you to leave, but I also can't make any promises," he admitted in a faint voice. "Sullivan made it clear my time is running out and I'm tired of fighting." The silence that followed was almost unbearable. Ava took a step back, leaning against the wall. The conversation left her feeling so empty that it hurt to breathe. She still held the flyer for the social project, now unsure if it represented a solution or just an escape from greater pain. "Maybe it's better if we end things here," she finally said, unable to meet his gaze. "You do what you need to do to keep your life, and I'll move on with mine." Ethan felt a chill at her words, but at the same time, part of him was so pressured that he let out a bitter agreement. "If that's what you want." Ava felt tears welling up but held them back. She needed to maintain some dignity. Walking to the door, she put the flyer in her pocket and turned to him. "It's not what I want, but maybe it's what has to happen." They exchanged one last look, filled with hurt and resignation. They seemed like two shipwreck survivors realizing there was no longer a raft capable of holding them both. Ethan moved to the window, his body heavy with weariness, unable to react. The sound of the door opening and closing softly marked Ava's departure, taking with her the little hope that remained. The next day, Ava went to the social project headquarters. She learned that if she passed a basic interview, she could begin an intensive course in hospitality and might secure a job at smaller hotels in the area. It was good news. Yet the weight in her chest didn't lessen, as it meant cutting the last tie to the sense of companionship she had never experienced before. After completing her registration, she received a flyer with the start date of the classes and boarded a bus back to the studio. In truth, she planned to collect her few belongings and head to a temporary shelter suggested by the organization, where she could stay until she figured out her future. Her mind was racing, but she needed to act. Suddenly, through the window, she saw Ethan standing on the sidewalk, staring blankly into the distance, likely looking for her. Her heart tightened. She wanted to get off but was determined not to prolong the drama. She decided to stay seated, letting the bus move forward. As the vehicle pulled away, she saw Ethan turn his face, catching sight of her through the fogged-up window. A painful silence filled her chest. She clutched the social project flyer to her heart, pressing her feet firmly on the bus floor to resist the impulse to run to him. She knew that if she did, she'd give up the only path left to start anew on her own. On the street, Ethan saw Ava's face through the misted glass of the bus window. He raised his hand in a desperate attempt to call out to her, but it was too late. The engine roared, and the bus moved on. He remained there, unable to move, feeling a growing void. He had the sense that by letting Ava leave, he was also losing something essential in himself, something he didn't fully understand, but that had already become a part of him. Ethan's empty gaze followed the departing bus as he wondered if he had just lost the last genuine thing he had ever known. Ethan spent that night unable to close his eyes. After watching Ava leave on the bus, guilt and emptiness seemed to consume him from within. The hotel room where he was still staying suddenly felt enormous, cold, and purposeless. He spent hours staring at the ceiling, recalling her gaze and the resigned expression as she walked away. No matter how much he tried to convince himself that he had done what was best for both of them, the pain remained. The next morning, he dragged himself to the bathroom, washed his face with cold water, and stared at his reflection. Deep, dark circles underlined the tense features of a man who didn't know what to do with his life. He put on the most presentable suit he could find and headed to the company, determined to speak with Mr. Sullivan and formalize his decision to cooperate. Even if it hurt, he believed that returning to Amber and complying with their demands might save the position he had worked for years to build. On the way, his phone rang multiple times, but he didn't answer. He assumed it was Amber or some curious reporter. Vegas gossip never took a break, always sniffing out the next scandal. He chose to ignore it and focus on the road, though his thoughts kept drifting back to Ava's face. Perhaps if he followed Sullivan's plans, he could somehow compensate her in the future. Yet, deep down, something told him it wouldn't work that way. Upon arriving at the office, he noticed a tense atmosphere. The few employees in the hallway avoided his gaze, and a heavy silence filled the air. It wasn't long before he saw Neil, his colleague and friend, approaching hastily. "Thank God you're here," Neil said, his face troubled, speaking in a low voice. "Sullivan's furious. He's been talking with Amber and thought you two had worked things out yesterday, but things seem to have gone another way." Ethan frowned. "Another way? What do you mean?" "It's better if you go to his office," Neil said, gesturing toward the closed door at the end of the hallway. "He's been yelling non-stop, and most of it's about what to do with you." A surge of fear coursed through Ethan, but he moved forward. He knew he couldn't delay the confrontation any longer, no matter the outcome. He opened the door without knocking and found Sullivan standing by his desk, shuffling through documents with an expression of fiery anger. As Ethan entered, Sullivan let the papers fall onto the desk, scattering them in disarray. "You decided to show up?" Sullivan said through clenched lips. "Let me make one thing clear. I'm done with empty promises. You haven't fixed things with Amber, haven't cleaned up your image, and now the investors are pushing back even harder." Ethan tried to speak, but Sullivan raised a hand to silence him. "I don't want excuses. This situation has gone on long enough," he said, taking a deep breath as if trying to maintain control. "Do you know what it means when we lose an important deal because our figurehead is embroiled in scandals? It means we lose money, credibility, everything." Ethan noticed several tabloid covers and gossip magazines on the desk. One featured a picture of him leaving Ava's studio in a hurry, accompanied by the headline, "Falling Millionaire Clings to Destitute." Blood rushed to his face, angered by the derogatory tone toward Ava. Before he could react, Sullivan continued. "It's over, Ethan. You're out of the company," Sullivan declared coldly, without preamble. "There's nothing more to negotiate. The shareholders have decided we can't carry this bad reputation any longer. Amber doesn't want to be involved with you anymore either. She called me this morning and said you're not the image she wants." For a moment, Ethan was speechless, the shock coursing through his body like a wave of heat that quickly cooled. He tried to argue. "I was ready to do what you asked, Sullivan. I was going to get back with Amber, give interviews, whatever it took." "Too late," Sullivan said, pointing to the pile of documents. "We're already taking steps to remove your name from any responsibilities here. The contracts you were handling will be reassigned to another executive." Ethan's legs felt weak. The worst-case scenario had been confirmed. He was truly fired, with no chance to defend himself. A mixture of humiliation and an ironic sense of relief swept over him. Part of him hated the idea of losing everything, but another part, deep down, felt a flicker of liberation. "Leave your belongings at reception on your way out," Sullivan finished, sitting back down. "I've instructed security to inspect and collect your items from your office." Without another word, Ethan turned on his heels and walked out. He saw Neil at the end of the corridor, who seemed to understand everything from just a glance. Neil opened his mouth to say something, but Ethan shook his head as if to say, "Don't say anything now." He walked straight to the office that had been his workspace for so many years. A strange sensation washed over him as he saw the cardboard box by the desk, already filled with some of his personal items. Travel photos, a best employee trophy from years ago, notebooks filled with annotations. Slowly, he gathered what remained. It was absurd how everything boiled down to a single box after years of dedication. A few colleagues approached hesitantly, offering awkward goodbyes, but he didn't want to linger and extend the humiliation. Grabbing the box, he left, feeling the hollow stares of those watching him go. Shortly after, as he dragged himself to the building's lobby, Ethan saw Amber leaning against a marble column, seemingly waiting for him. She wore sunglasses and a mocking smile. When she noticed his defeated expression, she let out a dry laugh. "They told me you were fired, huh?" she said, approaching with the sharp clack of her heels on the floor, her gaze settling on the box he held. "Sullivan called me and told me everything." Ethan struggled to find his voice, and when he spoke, it came out rougher than intended. "You left me hanging? I thought we had a deal." "Deal?" Amber raised an eyebrow cynically. "Honey, I'm not obligated to stay with someone who has no influence anymore. You're no good to me, and I gain nothing pretending to love you in public." He shook his head, frustrated. "So that's all I ever meant to you?" She shrugged, adjusting her sunglasses. "It's always been like this. Didn't you realize?" And she left without even saying goodbye. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, swallowing the bitter sensation of being betrayed by someone he had invested years in, believing the relationship was real. With heavy steps, he pushed through the building's glass doors, feeling the cold night air against his face. He wanted to scream, but no sound came out. He looked at the city outside, glowing as if the party never stopped, while he had lost his job, status, reputation, and let Ava walk away. Ava, meanwhile, stayed committed to rebuilding herself. After enrolling in the social project, she began attending the NGO's courses almost daily. Though she still stayed in her rented studio, she knew her savings and Ethan's initial help wouldn't last forever. She needed to ground herself and learn a skill to make her employable. The space was simple but welcoming. She helped others in vulnerable situations, exchanging experiences and encouraging newcomers. One afternoon, while completing a customer service exercise in a classroom, she noticed whispers around her. A fellow student showed her a phone screen displaying a headline, "Ex-millionaire ousted from company. Rumors suggest total breakup." Ethan's face accompanied the article, looking visibly worn. "Didn't you know him?" the classmate asked softly. Ava felt a shiver run down her spine. She wasn't sure how to feel. She stared at Ethan's image, clearly distressed. If he truly had lost everything, he was probably as lost as she had been for so long. Now that she was finally finding her footing, would he have someone to support him? Her conscience weighed on her, and memories of Ethan eclipsed her worries. He had told her so many times that he wouldn't abandon her, yet in the end, it was she who had stepped away to protect him. But now, there he was, jobless and seemingly without support, if the article was accurate. Ava shook her head, trying not to let it overwhelm her. That night, Ethan gathered his belongings from the hotel and left. His corporate card had been blocked, and he could no longer afford to stay there. Everything he owned fit into a medium suitcase and a bag. He had no firm plan or destination. He called Neil, but there was no answer. He tried reaching out to other contacts, but few offered help. The messages he received were filled with pity or veiled curiosity about the gossip. He collapsed onto a bench in a park, his bags by his side, the cold wind ruffling his hair. He gazed at the sky, seeking answers that wouldn't come. Then he remembered a mentor from his early days at the company, Mr. Hayes, an older man who had always supported him. With little hope, Ethan searched his phone for the old number and dialed. To his surprise, Hayes answered, his voice warm despite sounding sleepy. Ethan briefly explained what had happened, the injustices, the defeats, and the pressure from Sullivan and Amber. His mentor listened without judgment, asked a few pointed questions, and ultimately expressed his support. "Ethan, why don't you come to my small office tomorrow morning?" Hayes suggested. "I left that group a long time ago because I disagreed with the direction they were heading. But I'm still running some independent ventures, and you're a skilled professional even after this rough fall." Ethan could hardly believe what he was hearing. "You'd give me this chance?" "Yes, but let me warn you. It's nothing like the scale you're used to. This is a more human project, closer to real people. If you're willing to start from scratch, we can talk." The older man's words brought a flicker of hope. Ethan's exhaustion lessened slightly. He thanked Hayes and set a time to meet, ending the call with a sigh of relief. The following day, Ethan woke early in a cheap room he had rented for one night with the little money left in his personal account. He headed to the address Hayes had given him, a modest building in a quieter part of Vegas, far from the glitzy skyscrapers he was used to. Hayes greeted him warmly, inviting him into a simple yet welcoming office. "I'm glad you came," the mentor said, offering him coffee. "Now, tell me more. What do you want to do from here?" Ethan explained that he saw no purpose in returning to a life of facades, though he still craved stability. He wanted to start over with something genuine, where he could invest his values and desire to help others. He even mentioned how meeting Ava had profoundly changed his worldview, despite everything falling apart. Hayes listened intently, and in the end, gave Ethan a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "I'm working on a project for small local investors," Hayes said. "I want to launch something new, more inclusive, and I need someone who understands finances but can also connect with people without judgment. I think you're a good fit if you're ready to start from scratch." Ethan's heart warmed at the prospect. His wounded pride still ached, but knowing that someone genuinely believed in him was almost unbelievable. He shook his mentor's hand with a smile of heartfelt gratitude. "I won't let you down," he promised, feeling that a future, albeit uncertain, was still possible without stepping on the vulnerable or being beholden to Amber or Sullivan. Walking back to where he had left his luggage, Ethan checked his phone. No messages from Ava. He figured it wouldn't be easy to reconnect after how they had parted. Still, he couldn't stop thinking about her, wishing she knew that things were changing. Perhaps it wasn't too late. He missed her shy smile and the moments when, even without words, they understood each other. He paused on the sidewalk, watching people rush by. He opened his photo gallery, but had only a few images of Ava. Most had been taken by others, in moments when they didn't even realize they were being photographed. He found a grainy photo of them outside the casino, both looking tense but together. He closed the image, suppressing the urge to call her immediately. He didn't want to be intrusive without anything concrete to offer. Feeling the cold wind on his face, he pressed the phone to his chest. One phrase escaped his lips, low but resolute, capturing the mix of longing and determination within him. "If only she knew I still believe in us." Ethan woke up with his heart racing, a glimmer of hope piercing through the anxiety he felt. He had spent the past few days making calls and setting up meetings with potential local investors, following Mr. Hayes's guidance to secure resources and partnerships for the new venture. He no longer carried the aura of prominence, nor did he bear the title of high society's rising star. Yet, in some ways, this felt more authentic. Now he spoke directly to real people, small family businesses, merchants who understood the harsh realities of the streets. That morning, Ethan spread a collection of prospectuses, cover letters, and a list of contacts on the table, compiled with the help of his old mentor. Mr. Hayes supported him from afar, always available to provide advice or encouragement when self-doubt crept in. Everything needed to be organized quickly, as they planned a major launch event on New Year's Eve, a way to capitalize on the date and attract attention from those willing to invest in something innovative and empathetic. Early on, he sent out digital invitations to small and mid-sized business owners who, according to Hayes, might be interested in a proposal rooted in human values and mutual collaboration. As he clicked send for the umpteenth time, his phone rang with an unknown number. He answered, his voice hesitant, but knowing he couldn't afford to miss any opportunity. "Mr. Ethan? Good afternoon. This is Terry from the local publisher, Voice of Vegas. I heard you're organizing a special New Year's event and wanted to hear more about it so we can possibly cover the story." Ethan leaned back in his chair, surprised by the possibility of positive publicity. He briefly explained the project aimed at small investors, something that encouraged the community to believe in inclusive and socially impactful businesses. Terry seemed intrigued and, before ending the call, remarked, "I've noticed things have changed a lot for you since you left your previous company. I like this sense of renewal. Count on us to help spread the word." The call filled Ethan with hope, but also caution. He knew how fickle the Vegas press could be. Still, any help was welcome. He thanked Terry, hung up, and checked the time. He had little of it before his scheduled meeting with Mr. Hayes at a small restaurant. Gathering his papers into a folder, he avoided dwelling on how things could go wrong and rushed out the door. When he arrived at the restaurant, Hayes was already seated at a corner table in the cozy, unassuming venue. The mentor's enthusiasm shone in his eyes. "I've received some positive feedback," Hayes announced as Ethan approached. "Some modestly interested investors, but ones who represent strong local sectors. We'll need to formalize everything before New Year's Eve." Ethan nodded. "I plan to send preliminary contracts to everyone who confirms attendance. It's risky, but it's a start." Hayes placed a reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Keep this energy, son. There's something in your voice that convinces people. It's not just about profit. It's about purpose." They talked for nearly an hour, ironing out details and selecting the event venue. A small community hall reserved for New Year's festivities but open to hosting cultural and business initiatives. Setting up sound and lighting would be a challenge, but Hayes had friends willing to help. What Ethan didn't know was that Mr. Sullivan and Amber were monitoring his every move, fearful that his initiative might gain attention and further tarnish their reputations. Now that Ethan was no longer part of the company, they worried that any success he achieved would undermine their narrative for his dismissal. They began planting rumors within Vegas's financial circles, suggesting that Ethan's new venture was unstable and lacked credibility. Ava had no idea of the details, but during a session at the social project she attended, she overheard two colleagues discussing a young businessman who lost everything but is trying to make a comeback on New Year's Eve. Her heart raced instantly, as she suspected it could only be Ethan. Trying to mask her interest, she asked casually, "Do you know who this guy is? Where he's from?" The women exchanged glances, oblivious to Ava's hidden anxiety. "His name's Ethan, I think." "Yeah, that's it. People are saying he's organizing something different, about regular folks investing. Sounds cool." Ava bit her lip, a whirlwind of thoughts swirling in her mind. If it really was Ethan, it meant he was trying to rebuild. Though they were apart, she still felt a deep affection for him. She knew Ethan's good heart, despite all the pressures he'd faced. Should she get involved? She'd promised herself to stay out of his life to avoid causing him more trouble. But the memory of how he'd supported her, how he'd confronted her when no one else would, stirred something powerful within her. By the end of the day, she slipped a flyer about the social event into her bag and boarded a bus to her modest studio. Her chest felt heavy with doubt, but also ignited by a spark of determination to do something. Maybe she could help anonymously, volunteer, or just ensure the event succeeded somehow. After all, she owed Ethan so much. Sullivan learned that Ethan had scheduled an investment event for New Year's Eve. Furious, he summoned Amber for a private meeting at the law office they used for confidential matters. When she arrived, her expression mildly annoyed, he wasted no time voicing his frustration. "You told me Ethan would crash and burn after we fired him. So why the hell is he still acting like he can bounce back?" Amber pursed her lips, impatient. "Trust me, this won't last. But if you want my advice, spread the word that his event is amateurish. If no one shows up, he won't secure any money. End of story." Sullivan drummed his fingers on the desk, contemplating. "We'll contact likely attendees, scare them off. Tell them this guy's unstable, maybe even hint at fraud. And maybe someone sabotages the venue." "You're diabolically methodical when you want to be," Amber remarked with a sly smile. "That's why I enjoy working with you." Thus began a silent campaign of misinformation. Rumors circulated among Ethan's contacts, and the fallout was swift. Sponsors began calling back to cancel, offering vague excuses. Hayes was baffled by the sudden wave of rejections without clear reasons. He suspected foul play but had no proof. Ethan noticed the same trend. Each call to confirm attendance was met with evasive responses. "We've heard the event might not be reliable. There are rumors about legal issues with the organizer." He tried to explain, but it seemed decisions had already been made. As the year's end loomed, His desperation grew. Amid the chaos, Ava decided to visit the rumored event location. She found Ethan and Hayes at a makeshift table surrounded by scattered papers. The hall was dimly lit. Part of the wiring and lighting was yet to be installed. When Ethan saw her at the door, he froze. It was the first time they'd seen each other since Ava left on the bus. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken emotions. Sensing the moment's importance, Hayes discreetly stepped away, leaving them alone. "Hi," Ava began, her eyes downcast. "I heard about everything you're doing. I came to see if I could help." Ethan took a deep breath, memories of their time together rushing back. Anger, pain, affection, all mixed together. Yet above all, he felt a nearly indescribable relief at seeing her again, however uncertain her presence might be. "You didn't have to come. I thought you wanted to stay away." She gave a faint, sad smile. "I did. But when I heard you were trying something new, I couldn't ignore it. You helped me when no one else would." They locked eyes, a moment heavy with unresolved tension, until the crash of a falling box broke the spell. Hayes returned, clearing his throat politely. "Sorry to interrupt, but I need a second opinion on the decor." "Oh, hello?" He greeted Ava warmly. "You must be the young woman Ethan talks about so much." She blushed, surprised Ethan had even mentioned her. He quickly tried to steer the conversation away. "Let's focus on getting this set up," he said, gesturing towards stacked chairs and equipment boxes. "But first I need to share that we're having some problems. Half our potential sponsors backed out last minute." Ava frowned. "Why?" Hayes interjected. "They won't say. We've been getting strange calls. Feels orchestrated." Ava sighed, suspecting Sullivan and Amber might be behind it. While they talked, she discreetly checked social media on her phone and found malicious comments about Ethan's event from suspicious accounts. It certainly looked like sabotage. Before she could act on her suspicions, another problem arose. Someone inspecting the equipment boxes discovered key items missing, essential amplifiers and cables. Without them, they couldn't even set up basic audio for the event. "This can't be happening," Ethan muttered, looking at Ava. She replied softly, "I promise I'll help you fix this." Ava took a deep breath and approached the remaining equipment boxes, carefully examining the components that were still there. It was clear that someone had stolen key cables and amplifiers crucial for the New Year's event. The hall was dimly lit, with wires scattered across the floor, chairs stacked in one corner, and a small group of volunteers trying to bring some order to the chaos. Despite the disarray, she did not back down. She had made a promise to Ethan, and she intended to help fix everything. Hayes, ever composed, gave final instructions to two young men unloading more boxes in the corner. He noticed Ethan and Ava approaching, their expressions weary. "Most of our contacts have backed out, and now this equipment issue," Hayes murmured, wiping his forehead. "It's clearly sabotage, but we have no proof." Ethan glanced around, a growing sense of unease tightening his chest. "If we can't fix this quickly, no one will take our project seriously. We can't afford to lose credibility now." Ava gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "We can make this work. I know some people from the social project who might be able to donate or lend sound equipment. We also need to figure out how to reach a different audience, one less influenced by Sullivan's rumors." For a moment, Ethan's eyes brightened. Ava's positive energy, even amid such challenges, rekindled a glimmer of hope. She walked over to a corner of the hall, pulled out her phone, and started making calls. She would need to tap into every resource: people she'd met, NGOs, small business owners, anyone who could lend support or equipment. Hayes approached Ethan, gesturing at the schedule pinned to an improvised wooden board. "We're running out of time. New Year's is just around the corner, and we've only secured half of the partners who initially committed. Another third have already sent word they're pulling out." Ethan clenched his fists, recalling the recent phone calls from people who doubted the event's legitimacy due to rumors about its integrity. Though he lacked concrete evidence, He knew Sullivan and Amber were behind the smear campaign. "I won't let them win like this," he said quietly, taking a deep breath to calm his anger. "This project is all we have left. If it succeeds, we can show people there's a different way, something more human that the big corporations can't offer." Hayes nodded, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "And we will. It might take some time, but they can't sabotage our determination to make it happen." Later that afternoon, Ava returned to the hall with two people from the social project. One of them was Don, a former audio technician who had lost his job and ended up homeless due to personal struggles. With the help of the same NGO Ava had joined, he was trying to rebuild his life. Carrying a toolbox, he began examining the wiring, assessing what could be patched up to replace the stolen cables. "I'll need to buy or borrow some materials," Don explained, carefully handling the wires. "But I think we can rig something functional." Meanwhile, the other person, Marisa, a volunteer cook at a local church, offered to help with catering. She explained that, with donations and simple ingredients, she could prepare a modest buffet of snacks and hot drinks for the guests, creating a welcoming atmosphere for the evening. Ethan, who had started the day unsure of where help would come from, felt some of the tension ease. Even in adversity, there were people willing to believe in a more compassionate cause. "This is exactly what we need. Thank you so much," he said, smiling as he shook hands with Don and Marisa. Ava watched the scene with a hint of pride. She had managed to find people who, like her, understood the value of empathy. She walked over to Ethan as he tried to jot down all the items needed to replace the missing equipment. "What about the calls to our potential supporters?" she asked, picking up a sheet of paper to help with the checklist. "Many canceled," Ethan sighed. "But I still have a few contacts. Hayes mentioned some local shop owners might be interested if we reach out to them directly." "Then let's reach out." Ava pocketed her pen. "I'll go with you. We can visit them in person, explain the situation. Many people don't trust big corporations, but they might open up to someone who speaks to them face to face." Hayes, finishing a phone call, overheard the plan and gave a nod of approval. "Do it. Try the smaller avenues where family businesses are. Remember, our project isn't just about profit, it's about helping those in need. People will appreciate hearing that message if they trust the messenger." Over the next few days, Ava and Ethan traversed the quieter neighborhoods of Las Vegas. The storefronts lacked the neon glitz of the main strip's casinos. Instead, they were modest butcher shops, mechanic garages, small pharmacies, and tiny bakeries. At each stop, they introduced themselves, explained their inclusive New Year's event, and invited participation through small sponsorships or simple attendance to boost the audience. Some shop owners, initially skeptical, changed their stance when they saw Ava and Ethan's sincerity. It surprised them that someone cared about small businesses instead of chasing after moguls or celebrities. Gradually, support trickled in. Not everyone could commit financially, but many promised to attend or bring friends to learn about the initiative. In return, Ethan assured them their businesses would be promoted at the event, emphasizing that there were no barriers to joining. This growing network of goodwill offered a flicker of hope. Yet Sullivan and Amber's shadow loomed large. Ethan occasionally heard murmurs that someone had cast doubt on the event's credibility. Some even questioned whether he was just another scammer, preying on the unsuspecting. In such moments, Ava stepped in, sharing her personal story as proof that the project was genuine. Briefly, she explained how Ethan had helped her and how she now wanted to pay it forward. Reactions varied. Some were moved by her courage, while others remained silent, contemplative. What mattered was that, little by little, they gained a handful of supporters. Yet time was slipping away, and each lost day left them with less to prepare the haul. Meanwhile, Sullivan and Amber escalated their campaign. Days before New Year's, they anonymously posted on local forums, warning of a shady scheme, promising quick profits at the expense of the gullible. The lies spread quickly, convincing many. Ethan received calls from acquaintances asking if he was involved in fraud. He tried to clarify, but the wave of misinformation undermined their hard-earned progress. One evening, Ava found Ethan alone in the community hall, sitting on a step near the makeshift stage, his head in his hands. The dim light illuminated piles of chairs neatly stacked, while a portable radio played softly in the background. The space felt devoid of life. "Hey, don't let them get to you," she said, sitting beside him. "You've come so far. You've secured volunteers, catering support, and interest from local businesses. That's huge, considering everything you've faced." "I know," he sighed, raising his face to meet her gaze. "But I feel like everything could fall apart any second. Sullivan and Amber have money, connections. They can destroy whatever they want." Ava placed her hand on his, squeezing gently. "We won't let them. I promise. We have to believe that people will see the truth." He held her gaze, silent for a moment, before nodding. Her presence that calm night felt like the only solid ground he had left. Beneath his sadness at having once lost her was a deep gratitude that she was by his side again. As the final hours ticked down before the event, the pressure mounted. Would their efforts be enough? On the last day of the year, the community hall awoke in silence, save for the sound of the wind rattling the doors, as if the entire town hesitated to believe that something good could happen there. It was still early, the sun barely beginning to light the streets, but Ethan was already up, pacing back and forth, mentally trying to solve each problem. The disappearance of the generator and the mass cancellations from suppliers still felt like fatal blows. The chairs, tables, and part of the sound equipment were there, but no one was sure how long they'd remain. It seemed like anyone could show up and take everything back, citing rumors of cancellation. Ava arrived wearing the same worn coat she'd had since Ethan first met her, but her face carried an unshakable determination. As soon as she entered, she found Ethan adjusting some string lights in an attempt to decorate an improvised stage. "I managed to talk to a guy from the social project," she announced. "He offered to come here with 2 friends and help with security free of charge. That way we won't lose more equipment." Ethan nodded, grateful. "Great. Any help is welcome now." She approached to help him untangle the light cords. As they worked, a few volunteers arrived and began organizing the remaining tasks. Promotional posters, simple flyers explaining the event's purpose, and tables to hold the investor registration materials. Hours flew by, each person focused on their task, avoiding thoughts of the crises and concentrating on salvaging what they could. Around noon, Marissa called Ethan, saying the community kitchens were operational and that she'd arrive with food and drink supplies by late afternoon. It was a relief to know there'd at least be something to offer visitors. However, Hayes called almost simultaneously, informing him that one of the local sponsors had definitively backed out, citing fears of associating the brand with a potentially failed event. "We can't force them to stay," Ethan resigned, hanging up the phone. He sighed, leaning against the peeling paint on the hall's wall, which revealed layers of older colors beneath. "Whether 10 people or 100 show up, we'll have to make the best of it." Hayes agreed on the other end, wishing him luck and saying he'd arrive early in the evening to finalize the documentation and financial projections. Ethan hung up, pocketed his phone, and took a deep breath. He felt strange, as if standing on a precipice ready to leap. "I'm not giving up now," he murmured to himself, repeating the words silently over and over. Time rushed on mercilessly. As the sun began to fade into shades of orange across the sky, Ava climbed onto a stool to arrange some repurposed Christmas decorations, trying to bring charm to the space. The improvised lights flickered here and there, reflecting on the worn tiled floor. Each flicker seemed to remind everyone that, amidst the scarcity, there was still a glimmer of hope. Dawn appeared with a group of volunteers, carrying the generator they had managed to borrow. It wasn't as powerful as the one they had before, but with some luck, it would suffice to keep the sound system and basic lighting running. They hurried to connect it at the back of the hall, testing each outlet. "It's working, but don't overdo it. If we turn everything on at once, the power might go out," Don warned carefully. Ethan nodded, resigned to improvisation. They could do without some spotlights or floodlights. The most important thing was ensuring people could hear the speeches and feel minimally comfortable in the space. Marissa arrived shortly after, bringing coolers filled with snacks, bread, and thermos bottles of coffee, hot chocolate, and tea. The small kitchen team, donning aprons, settled into a corner, transforming the drab space into a cozy canteen. "At least the smell of fresh bread will cheer up whoever shows up," she joked, forcing a smile at the tense expressions around her. Ava smiled back, relieved that Marissa's goodwill had withstood the wave of negative rumors. Meanwhile, Ethan tried not to look at the clock repeatedly, but he couldn't help it. The scheduled start time for the event was drawing closer. For a moment, he feared the audience would consist solely of the volunteers who had worked so hard. 2 hours later, it was already past 7 p.m., and daylight had completely faded. The hall was almost ready, tidy, decorated, with soft background music playing from a speaker. Hayes, ever punctual, arrived carrying a stack of folders and printed documents. "I think we're ready, as much as we can be," he commented with a tense smile. "I'll talk to anyone who comes, explaining how they can contribute. You'll do the opening speech, Ethan." "All right," Ethan agreed, though he felt a knot in his stomach. "If anyone comes—" Little by little, the first guests began to arrive. 2 ladies from a craft shop came out of curiosity and praised the smell of the freshly opened bread at Marissa's counter. Then, the owner of a small downtown bookstore appeared with his wife. He looked skeptical but agreed to take one of the informational flyers and greeted Ethan politely. A young couple, supposedly friends of Don's, showed up without much fanfare, commenting that they were there to see what it was about. Small groups of local merchants timidly stepped into the hall, asking if the event was really happening. Ava and Ethan took turns welcoming the visitors, smiling and assuring them that yes, they were ready to begin. It wasn't hundreds of people, but when Ethan looked around, he recognized about 20 faces that didn't belong to the team. That was already more than he had dared to hope for hours earlier. As the minutes passed, more people arrived, probably drawn by curiosity or the desire to find out if the cancellation rumors were false. Within half an hour, the hall had at least 50 guests circulating, grabbing snacks, admiring the decorations, and greeting Hayes. Ava watched the scene with a racing heart. As simple as it seemed, seeing people there, talking and commenting on the project, felt like a victory. She approached Ethan, who was trying to organize his notes for the opening speech. "We've got a better turnout than we expected," she said, sounding excited. "And they seem interested after all." He returned her smile, his eyes shining with hope. "It's now or never." At 8 p.m. the stage lights turned on, though dimly due to the backup generator, and Ethan stepped up to the microphone. He scanned the audience, a diverse group, curious young people, stern-looking elders, elegant women, and others in simpler attire, all looking directly at him. He gripped the microphone, nervous. "Good evening," he began, his voice echoing lightly through the hall. "Thank you so much for coming to our year-end event. As many of you know, this is a unique occasion, unlike what Vegas usually offers. We don't have grand casinos or celebrities, but we do have a genuine desire to create something new, something that connects those who want to support honest businesses with people looking for a fresh start." He went on to explain the essence of the project, how investments in micro-projects could reintegrate people experiencing homelessness or vulnerability and allow small businesses to grow together. He spoke from the heart, without relying on canned speeches, recalling every door he had knocked on and every skeptical look he had faced. The audience seemed engaged, nodding in approval or curiosity. At the end, Hayes joined him on stage and presented some financial projections. He distributed a simple handout with key points and made himself available for questions. Some merchants wanted more details and approached the stage to talk. Ava, emotional, watched from a distance, supporting from behind the scenes. Across the hall, Dawn and Marissa exchanged excited smiles. It was incredible how a single night could carry so much hope. Then a familiar figure appeared with a small entourage, someone none of them expected to see. Mr. Sullivan arrived, accompanied by two men in suits, casting looks of disdain around the room. Amber was there too, impeccably made up and confident, scanning the decorations as if evaluating a mediocre spectacle. Ethan's heart sank. He hadn't imagined they'd dare to show up, especially after their numerous sabotages. "This big event of yours looks rather modest," Sullivan remarked loudly, drawing the attention of some guests. "Congratulations, Ethan. You've really outdone yourselves to put on a carnival fair." Ava clenched her teeth but held her composure. Ethan, though tense, tried to stay calm. "You're not welcome here, but if you want to watch, feel free. We can't force anyone out." Amber smirked, her critical gaze sweeping over the hall. "I just came to see if these naive people are falling for your scam." Some merchants nearby overheard the provocation and began stepping back, fearing a confrontation. The atmosphere grew heavy. Before the situation could escalate, Hayes intervened, politely explaining that this was a public, rented space and no one would be forcibly removed. Sullivan chuckled mockingly and stationed himself in a corner, seemingly waiting for the right moment to disrupt things. The tension eased slightly when suddenly a group of locals arrived, warmly greeting Ethan and Ava. It seemed the solidarity networks had worked. More people took their seats, began sampling Marissa's snacks, and once again, optimism prevailed. Sullivan and Amber were left isolated, unable to dampen the mood. They watched in astonishment as the simple but genuinely interested attendees remained undeterred by their presence. The presentation continued as planned. Brief speeches from merchants already committed to micro-investments followed, with some even publicly announcing their trust in Ethan and Hayes. At one point, Amber, impatient, seemed ready to leave, but Sullivan convinced her to stay, likely still hoping to find something to accuse Ethan of. However, they found no opportunity. Everything was in order. As midnight approached, the hall came alive. The few lights they had flickered, the background music was warm and inviting, and people began to toast with paper cups filled with coffee and hot chocolate. Dawn adjusted the microphone so anyone could give spontaneous testimonials. Ava, shyly, took the microphone for a moment and shared her story, how she had been treated with disdain on the streets of Vegas, and how Ethan had helped her. She spoke about her struggle to rebuild her life and expressed gratitude for the chance to be there. Many listeners were moved. Finally, as the last moments of the year ticked away, Hayes invited everyone to join the countdown. Even without grand fireworks or sophisticated displays, there was a palpable sense of camaraderie. Sullivan and Amber remained in their corner, sulking. They realized they couldn't sabotage anything further. Many merchants had already signed initial commitments, and the overall atmosphere was one of unity. Perhaps they understood they had lost more than they had gained in trying to destroy Ethan. And then, with only a few seconds to go until midnight, the hall's lights flickered, the generator groaned but held firm. Ethan and Ava exchanged glances, a mixture of relief and joy, their hands clasped together. The hall joined in unison. 3, 2, 1, Happy New Year! And in that moment, the sparkle in Ethan and Ava's eyes said it all. The past was behind them, and a promising future lay ahead. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen.